afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be here. Long intro by Monica, as always, but it is a pleasure to be back at the university. We are all DU students, just like you. We are Guru Bhais. And unlike you guys, we had only 3 years of graduation. And so I'm really glad that the National Education Policy has changed that system. And now you have a 4-year system wherein you don't have to do a master's. You can directly do a PhD if you wanted to. So you get some experience in research within your bachelor's, don't you, in your final year? And that is why this is the first year that we at NIPGR and DPT, we have started taking PhD students who are graduate students rather than postgraduates. In fact, this year is my first year when I have a PhD student for the first time in 20 years who is a fresh graduate. And so therefore, I'm looking forward for more of you to join us and think about taking up science in a more serious way. India, in the 1980s, of course, India started to think about how technology would be very important, and the IITs were started. And today, India is leading the world in graduates in engineering. Last year actually, the government again decided another major change, which would be the Bio E3 policy, whereby biotechnology and bio-drawn rules, millions of years of biological knowledge being drawn into understanding technology. And so Bio E3 is the next big thing that is right now happening. And so therefore you guys are in such a great position to be on a 4-year graduation program, whereby you can be the next generation of world-leading technologists. And this Bio E3 policy is where the government decided that fresh graduate students could now come into PhD programs, and the PhD programs would also be changing in India throughout this year, starting with the I3C program of the DBT. We now have, in the olden days, I don't know if any of you even know, the PhD used to be some years and one supervisor and one student, but now it's going to be multiple supervisors to the same student. So you join us, you work with us for a year, then we send you to the industry, so you get some idea about the industry and entrepreneurship. And after that, you come back to us or to go to another lab, and then you get an overall idea rather than becoming a little lab rat like we used to be in our days. You guys will have a much wider exposure to the industry as well as the academia through the new format of PhD as we go forward, which is going to become the convention now. And I feel very much envious sometimes that you guys have that option to do that, which we did not. I, of course, stumbled along and, as Monica told you, did botany, then biomedicine, and then immunology, and then computational biology, all to say that interdisciplinarity is what it is. And you guys have that from now, right within your graduation. If you want to change, if you want a artsy subject or economics related subjects, you can now study them. And this is exactly what is needed for the major questions going forward in the world. The United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals, climate change itself, it is not a problem of one subject. It is not going to be addressed by one subject expertise. It will require interdisciplinarity. And that is what we are hoping to have. Hopefully some of you will join us for a PhD in the coming years. We are thinking through the Bio E3 policy that we could, Delhi jaise cities, may we have so much pollution ka problem. If biologists would come up with a way to address this, how would biologists come up with it? How would botanists, for example? All of you have been studying about rubisco. All of you have been studying about photosynthesis. This is the only enzyme that can snatch up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and fix it somewhere. All other methods, direct air capture going on in the world of highest technologies globally, the most expensive methods of carbon sequestration are not as efficient as rubisco. So why can't we come up with a mechanism to make rubisco so efficient, probably put it on a nanochip, work with synthetic chemists, work with nanotechnologists to be able to have some kind of a spray where you would have rubisco and it would capture all the black carbon and we find a way to fix it, not into the regular sinks, but into geological sinks somehow, and find a solution to the pollution problem or other problems in the world, particularly those facing us. But ये नहीं होगा जब तक you guys will not come up with interdisciplinary, like talking to each other, talking across subjects. How can a mathematician be friends with a botanist, be friends with an economist, be friends with an entomologist, and so on? It can only happen through interdisciplinarity. And so I was here last year, right, Monica, when Peter Murray Rust was in India for climate. And at that time, I was talking about how we, myself, my colleagues in Cambridge and in TIB Germany, we've come up with Semantic Climate. It is a little movement of youngsters and enthusiasts like us who come together to address climate change. You are welcome to join us as interns if you want to, but that's not important. Think about how you yourself can address climate change. And Peter connected me to Matthew, and then Matthew said, I'm going to Sri Lanka to meet the Prime Minister and the rest of the governments there, and they have adopted his Climate Academy book for a new curriculum in climate change for the entire Sri Lankan government and the schools and colleges associated with them. So I wrote to him at that time when he said, all right, Geeta, I'm going to be in Sri Lanka. And I said, well, how does that help unless you come to India? So he has to come. So I said, come over to India. Sri Lanka is not so far from us. So he came over to India. He went to Bangalore. And then I said, nahi, Bangalore nahi chalega, come to Delhi, tab tak baat nahi banti. So then he came to Delhi and he's now in Delhi. Thank you, Matthew, for doing that. And we've had the opportunity to meet up with students in colleges and schools like yourselves. Please feel free to ask us whatever questions you have in mind, and we'd be very happy to interact with you and to know what you're thinking, because it's been a long time since we ourselves were students. Just about that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica.
Okay, hello, and thank you for such kind introduction. I feel very much at home with the word interdisciplinary being said so much, because philosophy, which is my subject, is exactly that. It's a 360-degree view of the world and of the human condition and everything. And in fact, I'm going to start in the PowerPoint. Sorry. I'm going to start with a piece of art, actually, which is in the PowerPoint. It is okay. The YouTube later. Whilst I was loading up, if I just give you a heads up on this. So this is the program, which is the Climate Academy program. And I'm going to just give you the headlines today of mainly the science of climate change. What is the critical systems understanding of the crisis? And as this book goes through, there's 16 chapters. The later chapters are this interdisciplinariness, which has been talked about, where I talk about psychology, sociology, and so on. Oh, thanks. So this is for free. I mean, I can't give you this one because I need to go to more places and put it in the air and so on. But if you go to the Climate Academy website at the end of the day, you just fill in your name, and what you get is this book. It's 360 pages, a PDF, and anything which I say today is essentially detailed inside here. Okay, and that's a reference to also to what we do with Peter Murray-Rust, the Cambridge professor, and Gitanjali, and that is this absolute commitment to the public understanding of science. I'm here for free. I travel. I do all of this in my spare time. My normal job is a teacher in a secondary school. I teach philosophy, so in a couple of weeks I'll be in a classroom again. And what drives me is the power of releasing this knowledge about climate into the public space, because it's amazing what people don't know. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way, I mean that in a kind of exciting way, that you can suddenly start to see this from a completely different perspective. Okay, so I'm going to give you a systems view. Enough about me. Here's a piece of art. So I walked past this by chance about 20 years ago, and if you look on the left, there's two little steps, and I thought it was a children's playground, maybe just missing some plastic slides or ropes or something, but it's not a playground. It is a piece of art, because if you sit where those seats are on the left, this happens. So all the trees line up. You have to move your head a little bit to get it exactly right, but now you're inside something, which from the outside just looks random. Now this is actually a piece of art about religious belief. It's a piece of art, it's under this, near the cathedral in Durham in the UK, and it's about how from the outside religions look rather arbitrary, rather random, a bit strange. For me, certainly when I go around Delhi in an Uber, I see many religious things which I don't understand from the outside. But when you sit in the middle, they have a coherence and an energy, a synergy. It's like that in a family as well. The family jokes are only funny from the inside. Or my children will tell me that they're not even, my jokes are not even funny from the inside. But anyway, so that's how things look from when you get a proper systems perspective. And the thing is that climate change from the outside to many of you might look like that. You might have heard bits and pieces about climate in school at a certain age, in a geography class, or you may in the media, or in a book here or there. But did we ever sit in the place where all those things come together and you see this, let's call it a systems perspective? So that's what the Climate Academy program is about. In some ways, I'm not saying anything radically new in this program, but I'm giving a vantage point which is sort of, let's call it revelatory. Because you can only see some things from that systems perspective. Okay. So, that's the book that I mentioned. Again, you can download it for free as a PDF. So, the absolute basics. I mean, we have to just start with the most basic thing. I'll be very fast through this, but we've known about climate change since 1824. A French physicist, Fourier, he understood the greenhouse effect. Chemicals of CO2 makes things hotter. Eunice Foote, shout out for female scientists, often looked over. She did some groundbreaking work in explaining the dynamics of that a little bit more. Now, we now know about everything from what's called a sigma 5 level certainty. So unless you're a complete weirdo, you're going to accept climate change. Okay? I have started to have in my classrooms in secondary schools, some students have come into my classroom aged 17 and 18, and they've just been in some weird YouTube space, and for some reason they don't accept climate change. Now, I've got no time for that. I don't even want to talk about it. That's just weird. Okay? So let's move on. There's my son. He's happy, and he's happy because he doesn't have a fever. So this is the first example of how thinking about things from a systems perspective changes things. So if he did have a fever, let's say of 2 degrees, he would not feel good at all. I mean, even 1.5 is quite bad. At 2 degrees, you start to not even be able to watch Netflix or something like that. Now, 4 degrees is a medical emergency. You need to go to hospital, you're going to die in 24 hours. So when we look at that graph and you see this weird thing which has happened with humans, we have shunted the whole system into a completely new gear. So this graph goes back 800,000 years. It could actually go back 4 million years. You can see there's a stable natural equilibrium within which we have climate change, different ice ages and so on, because of the wobble of the earth and so on. And then that really, really strange thing happens, which is called fossil fuel burning. And that is like suddenly changing, and speaking to biologists, as you're botanists, you, of all people, understand the importance of temperature as a fundamental component of any biological system. Now, the Earth is just like a human body, but it's just a bigger biological system. So 2 degrees might not sound like a lot, like 2 degrees extra in the temperature in Delhi doesn't change much, but 2 degrees from a systems perspective has a revolutionary impact. And 4 degrees has a catastrophic impact. So, next question, how close are we then to these temperatures? Well, we've got 80 gigatons of carbon left before we hit 1.5, and 680 gigatons of carbon left for 2 degrees. We currently emit 42 gigatons. So we're already at just about 1.4 degrees. So we already have a fever. You notice that in the irregularity of the monsoons and all across the world. You can see this destabilization has already started taking place. And it doesn't take a PhD in maths to work out that 1.5 is about 2 years away. And 2 degrees is about 17 years away. So we do have time to change this. It is possible, we can stop. Now 2 degrees is important because this is the line at which, a bit like, again, the human, things are manageable. But if we go over 2 degrees, if you go to 3 degrees, then the Amazon rainforest collapses. Now that's a major body part of the Earth system. You can't have the Amazon rainforest collapse and it not affect every other ecosystem in the vicinity and so on and so on. That is a major failure. And what you're into now is what is called tipping points. And if we go over this 2 degree threshold, we enter into a minefield of events which may happen which cause irreversible cascading effects, of which we then can't control it. So this is why the Paris Agreement is so, 1.5 preferably, or 2 degrees. That's why 2 degrees matters. Okay. And this is the most important map in the world. And none of my students would see that map if I didn't show it to them. That is not in a geography textbook. In a geography textbook in standard secondary school, they don't have that map. In a standard geography textbook, they don't have tipping points mentioned. I speak with, prominent people regularly trying to promote this program to ministers of education, but also in the media. I was in London 3 weeks ago. I was speaking with 3 major news organizations, the 3 major news channels. And the CEO and their news team, they were not literate with tipping points and this. So they're covering climate in the media in an illiterate way. So they would report on extreme weather events. So in fact, on the BBC just a month ago, I actually recorded a clip. I was so triggered by it. It's like, you can't do that. This is the BBC, which is, in general, quite reliable. The BBC, the man was explaining, actually, a little bit of the carbon budget. So he was going through the carbon budget, and he was saying blah, 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 blah. And then he was asked the question on Radio 4 in the main news program in the morning, okay, but why does 2 degrees matter? I held my breath. And he said, well, it leads to more extreme weather events. That is not okay. For the BBC, with Oxford, Cambridge graduates, basically, that is just illiterate. Yes, it does cause extreme weather events. But 2 degrees matters because it's a threshold point at which the whole system may collapse. Now, if we don't know that, the rest of our thinking is, in a way, probably a little bit sketchy. Okay. So this is just a graphic about those tipping points. You can think of it a bit like a relationship. Yeah, the blue, that's like a relationship. You can have arguments. I mean, in every relationship, you can have an argument. Yeah, that's okay. Stuff happens. The purple is like, it's not the first time. I'm not sure. I'm starting to think, what's going on? And then the red one is like, okay, this is irreversible. You can't do that, or whatever. And the thing is that the Earth, and when you do biology, I'm sure you're so aware of how subtle and how well stitched together all these biological systems are. There is a remarkable resilience built into Earth systems that's been there for millions of years. And as biologists, as you tease open these kind of the fibers of all these biological processes, it's sometimes astonishing, like how resilient it is or how coherent it is. Well, then we should not be just moving like a laptop at 110 volts. You can't then expect it to function at 180 volts or 200 volts. It just doesn't work. So I'm going to do some myth busting now in the final phase of my thing. The first thing is that I imagine that many of you feel your moral sense of climate change comes down to an individual carbon footprint. You're conscious about how you do things. Like, so for example, I don't have a car. I get around on public transport. So that I feel good about that. I don't have a car. So, but the thing is that this narrative about climate change is actually fueled by the fossil fuel industry. So they want us to feel guilty about our own individual actions, And that distracts us away from the structural questions about the energy system, because we are still 82% driven by fossil fuels. Anytime you do anything, 82% of the time, it's driven by fossil fuel energy. So by getting you to think on your own about your own individual actions, we don't then ask the big structural question. And schools are huge on this. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that we should just forget your own carbon footprint, go out and do whatever. Of course we should be concerned about that. It's only the first thing we should do. The next is to be more exploratory and ask and try and wrestle the structural things into place. Okay. So everything which I'm telling you today, those numbers, it's all approved. These scientists have all gone through the key data here. So it takes about 2 hours to go through the spreadsheets which are behind the main chapter of this book, chapter 7, which is on this critics index. Everything is solid. Okay, so I'm not just some bloke from Manchester making this up. This is high level approved science. Okay, so myth number 2. If I was to let me ask you to name a country which you think is most responsible for emissions. Very nice. It's always the same sound bubble. Okay? China, USA, India. Now I'm going to show you which is the worst. Singapore is by far the most emitting country. And if we go down the list a little bit, Belgium's not that good either. There's not inside the book. There's every single nation in the world is detailed. Or you can also go on the Cutax website and get the PDF with all the data. But notice these are all global north countries. They're all global north countries. Now, there's 2 things I have to tell you about these numbers. The first is that the starting point for these numbers is that you take the carbon budget and you divide it per person. Now, when you do that, you get a different view of responsibility. So it is true, actually, that China does produce the most CO2 in terms of tons. That's correct. But they've got over 1 billion people. So are we saying, as a world civilization, that some people deserve to breathe more than other people? Is our starting point for responsibility about the crisis? Where do we start? Well, of course, if you don't start with just dividing the atmosphere per person, I think that's a pretty basic first move on the chessboard. Now, I could give you lots of stories about I've been in COP meetings in Madrid, and these numbers are not easy to get out into public, because the UN, I would argue, quite a colonial organisation, the UN doesn't want to have any finger pointing. They say it's not good for psychology. We need to be all in this together. Don't point at individual countries. Well, I think we can point a diagnostic finger. We should point a diagnostic finger at where the emissions are coming from per person. Okay, so there's China. So for 2 degrees, China needs to reduce its emissions by 10% per year. That's quite a lot. It's doable, but it's quite a lot. And that's every year. So from this year, next year, 10 degrees, you have to come down to 0, or close to 0. The UK, which claims, and the BBC is always saying, yeah, the UK brackets a leader in climate change. Well, yeah, a leader in, we caused most, if you look at historic emissions, yes, the UK is a leader in climate change. In fact, if you would have put a glass bowl over the UK, and if the UK had to live with its own emissions from the start of the Industrial Revolution, the UK would already be over 4 degrees. But we have shared our emissions with the rest of the world. So, okay, France got quite a decent nuclear program. India, there you are, 1.4. So this is a question of social justice. Huh? Global North, Global South. And some countries could actually increase their emissions and we'd still be okay. Right. Time for a little break. We can have questions at the. I've got a few more slides of some myths, but maybe we go to the YouTube. Just to, yeah, in terms of psychology, you're probably feeling quite disempowered now. You're probably feeling a little bit, let's say, intimidated or something by the data or whatever. That's normal, but we can't argue with physics and chemistry. So that's just reality. It's what it is. There's no point in education if our first principle is not the truth. Now, inside the Climate Academy, if you could put the video with the chosen G's. Inside the Climate Academy, what we do is we get students to communicate these truths to the rest of the world. That's essentially our main project. And one of the ways in which you can do that is by using irony or humour. Because with irony, what you can do, you can hold on to a dark truth but have a laugh about it at the same time. In ancient Greek society, that was, you go to your tragic plays, you go to Oedipus Rex or whatever, and then you have a little bit of laugh about it. Okay, let's have a laugh at some English people now. So here's some English people, and they're chasing cheese. Now, as you watch this, as they chase cheese down a hill, I want you to think of the cheese as gross domestic product. It's a symbol for GDP. It's a symbol for growth. And if you listen to politicians and any economist, it's all about growth. Okay, I like cheese, but I don't like it enough to break my neck. Okay. If you want to watch more, you just type "chasing cheese" into YouTube, and you can have 20 minutes of like near-death experiences. But so we're capable of stupidity. We are so capable. I mean, we are remarkable. We have remarkable scientific brains. We're not called Homo sapiens for nothing. But at the same time, hello, what are we doing? So I'm just going to take through a few more, 3 or 4 more myths, and then we can have question and answers. In some ways, what I'm saying is quite simple. Yeah, I'm not saying anything profoundly difficult. Of course, there is complexity in anything. Like these tipping points, if you have a degree in physics, then there's all kinds of probabilities you need to weigh in your head, there's and calculations and modelling and projections and things like that. It's very complex. But at the headline level, we have a lot of security about what we know. Okay. I think it needs to go into full screen. Onto full screen.
Change your display settings from notes to full screen.
It's okay. When you're a teacher, what happens is they take a part of your brain out, which is competent with electronic equipment. It's like you get your teaching certificate, and then they take that part of your brain away. But this always happens to me, right? Okay. It happens to everyone. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to show you the next slide is about the word transition. So words matter, yeah. So we talked about tipping points, but the next word, which is important, is transition. Because people talk about the energy transition or the green transition. The media is always talking about this. If my students mention that word to me, I start eating the table or the chair or whatever's available. Because there is no green transition yet. Like, yes, we should have a green transition. That's exactly what we need. Those numbers you saw before, that's exactly what we should be doing. But we are not doing it. So if you go back to the first COP that was in 1995, we were doing 29 gigatons of CO2. 29. We're now doing 42. And we call that a transition. Why do we call that? Honestly, I don't understand it. Why do we call that a transition? It's an energy addition. The thing is that we have this impression that there's more green things going on. You see more solar panels around. You see green things in the media or whatever. You see these SDG goals everywhere and things like that. But what's actually happening behind the surface is we're just simply adding more CO2 every time. The total demand for energy always outpaces. The green energy just takes off the edge of the increase. That's all that we're doing at the moment. So those, you can see the numbers, like 29 gigatons, 30, 32, 30, 31. So the reason I've got an athlete there is like, imagine my daughter, she says, actually, because she's actually doing a biology degree. Imagine she came home and she said, actually, I want to be a 200-meter runner. And the world record for 200 meters for women is 21 seconds. And she can run it in 29. So I say, yeah, go girl, I believe in you. But then, so I employ a very expensive coach to make sure she gets this world title and Olympic record. And that's what happens to her time. I don't think she's making progress. Okay. The fetish of plastic waste. I'm sorry if this sort of upsets. This happens when I go in schools, but schools around the world have this weird. You could do a Freudian analysis probably, of plastic fetish. Plastic has got almost nothing to do with climate change. Almost nothing. The red dots, the red squares, right? It's only 3%. If we stopped every single piece of plastic, I'm not just talking single-use plastic. It has a minimal effect. Again, the fossil fuel industry is peddling this to distract us from the main structural question. So I'm not saying microplastics, blah, 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 it's a problem. But it's not an existential problem. It's a problem of litter. It's a problem of pollution. It's not a problem of emissions. Sometimes when I go around school, then I have my philosophy packs every year, so I'll be giving out things on Marx and Freud to my students in big bits of paper in September. And sometimes in the corridor, a teacher often will stop me and say, but what is this paper? I thought you were the green man, Well, honestly, I'm quite proud of that paper because that's carbon that's been sequestered out of the atmosphere via photosynthesis and is now in my hands. It's not in the atmosphere. I'm not promoting the deforestation or anything like that, of course. But when you balance the impact of that versus what you can see on the right-hand side, where everything's in the cloud and everything's electronic, my school was so proud of giving all their students a laptop. We had this everybody bring your laptop to school policy. It's like, you're kidding me. The impact on the earth for that, just think a little bit more deeply about, You're not just at the surface level of your... And that's also, go back to the numbers before, that's also one of the reasons why those numbers are surprising, like Singapore is very high and so on. Because what has essentially happened in the world is that the global north has had its infrastructure development, and it now has all of its products manufactured abroad. So my mobile phone, that was not made in Belgium, that was made in China. But the counting, when you look at like who's emitting, well, China's making a lot of mobile phones for the rest of the world. So the world looks at China, oh, what, you naughty boy. Yeah, but hey, we're making your stuff. Okay, green growth. Yes, absolutely, that's what we need. But the problem is with the word growth. We live inside a capitalist matrix. If you've seen the film The Matrix. And I have to say, I have fundamental doubts about whether an exit from the climate crisis is compatible with capitalism. I just say it. And you have to be ready to ask that question. Now, isn't it weird that there's some kind of dogma about capitalism? Like, you can't question capitalism. You can't question growth. Well, if there's no economy at 3 degrees and 4 degrees, well, of course we have to question it. And just to illustrate that, I'm nearly finished now. My dad used to, growing up with my dad, he had one light bulb in the lounge, one light bulb in the bedroom, etc. That's not my dad's house, but that's typical of the kind of lighting that he has now. LEDs, super efficient, and he feels he's being energy efficient. I'm like, yeah, but Dad, you've now got 1,500 lights. So it's called the rebound effect. So even if we think things are getting more efficient, again, you have to take the system's view. Like, what's the overall impact of 1,500 LED lights versus one simple light that lasts whatever? Okay. So I challenge schools with this final thing. It's a bingo game. Greenwash is maybe too harsh, but you have to be provocative. What we have done so far, look at those CO2 levels, they are going up. We are not looking at the structural question. We have an illiterate, you can graduate from secondary school and not know what the word tipping point is. Imagine in biology that you have an advanced understanding of mitochondria, but you don't know what a penis can do. I'm sorry to be blunt, but how can we allow students to graduate from secondary school without the most basic data and facts about what is happening on the planet? We're in the middle of a 6th mass extinction event. But we sort of drift through secondary education. It's not compulsory for them to understand tipping points, carbon budgets, and so on. That's madness. It's madness. So this is what, again, as it was kind of mentioned, Sri Lanka, they're going to start rolling out the Climate Academy program. And I told them, look, you've got to start putting this. These are the words that really show that you're doing a proper job on environmental education. Are your students able to talk about climate justice, planetary boundaries, tipping points, degrowth, colonialism, etc., etc.? Okay, so to finish, you can, and I'll be optimistic now, you can join in. So what you can do is, if you want, once you've gone to the Climate Academy webpage and you've got the email, in a few weeks, my dad's helping me build a Moodle. It's almost done, and by about September, you'll be able to read all the chapters inside a Moodle and then do a quiz. It's a simple quiz, but it just shows that you've gone through this system's level of understanding, and then you can have a certificate at the end of it. The certificate costs like a little bit. It's I think it's €5 for you. I've done it in a kind of global north. I charge people in the global north much more, and people in the global. Okay. So you can show that you have this systems understanding. Okay, 16 chapters, quick quiz. If you want to go one step further, you can. You can start becoming agents of change yourself, not just knowing it, but actually doing something. And that is in your university, or you can start doing things like events. You can invite speakers. You can yourself present about tipping points. You can go into classrooms yourself. You can do peer teaching. I don't know. You can start being active. And my last point is to do with this number on the top left there, the 3.5%. Because there's something to be optimistic about. And that is that Erica Chenoweth, a Harvard professor, a few years ago, she did a study of every single social revolution in the 20th century. And she calculated how many people were actually engaged in those revolutions. Like actually engaged, actually on the streets, or doing really like the hard work of organizing meetings, or, you know, getting lawyers and things like the real kind of muscular work of fighting for something. And she found out that in the entire 20th century, in all non-violent revolutions, you never needed more than 3.5% of a population to engage. That was the maximum. The civil rights movement was closer to 2%, as was the Indian independence movement led by Gandhi. Thank you for the book. So this is so stupid what we're doing. If we just start informing each other about it, that's ground zero for who knows what comes next. And of course, every revolution which happens always looks impossible when you start it. If you were on the Salt March in 1930s, if you were honest, perhaps, with yourself, you would not think that you could throw over centuries of colonial abuse and injustice. Every single mechanism, from like the control of the press to the police to state apparatus, everything was against you having independence. It was so improbable, but you did it. It's the same with the civil rights movement. You try and tell somebody on a bus boycott in the 1950s that in 9 years they would have the Civil Rights Act. They thought you were stupid. You're kidding me? Like, my uncle was lynched. My dad was, whatever. Just generations of total injustice and abuse, but it was overthrown. So I think we're in a similar thing with climate now. We're at a point at which the system is already a little bit destabilized, and it will become increasingly destabilized. And if we could just be clear, and we have some people, just a few people, just speaking the truth about it, who knows what happens next? So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm with you today. I believe in this. We're late in the game, but I still believe in it. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.